What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the 2023-2024 season finale of Studs and Duds, the most comprehensive NFL player review series on the internet. For those longtime viewers of the channel, I know you've been waiting for this one, so thank you for your patience. How this is going to work here for the finale, I'm going to be making 8 of these episodes over the coming weeks, doing them 4 teams at a time by division, as each division is fully eliminated from the playoffs. So we'll be getting through these in due time as the playoffs wrap up here. But before we do get started, as always, I like to let people that may be new to the series know what Studs and Duds is all about. And what you may not know is back in 2016, this channel got its start actually as a Madden channel, where I have a custom community roster where I go and edit the player ratings to be what are, in my opinion, more accurate and realistic. And then, I'd come on here and talk about what I was seeing in the games and why I made those changes. And while I no longer make Madden content on this channel, I do still do some rebuilds and stuff over on TFG Plays, my second channel, if you want to check that out. I do still make that roster and this series because it's a great way for me to do my research and stay on top of everybody around the league, but it's also a great way to convey and take a wide lens look at who the rising and falling players around the league are, who's trending up, who's maybe not playing so well for every single player around the NFL. And throughout this video, you're going to be seeing those Madden ratings going up or down. But I do want you to know that those changes do a pretty good job to reflect how I perceive these players in real life, and the changes certainly stem from me watching the film and doing my own research and analysis. But without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy. Please do hit that like button as we get into it, and let's get started. And today we will be taking on the NFC West and starting here with the Arizona Cardinals. And for their star of the season, which for those that haven't been keeping up with the series, this is technically more of the star of the second half of the season. Our last episode of Studs and Duds ended up around week 8. But star of the season just rolls off the tongue a little bit better than star of the second half of the season. But this is basically the highest riser for the team in this time frame. Not necessarily like team MVP, but without further ado, let's get into it. Trey McBride for the Cardinals. Cliff Kingsbury and Steve Keim were right, maybe, at least on this one. There was some head-scratching analysis, I suppose, when they had Zach Ertz and a lot of other needs, and they took another tight end in a system that didn't really use 2 tight ends, but at least the baseline of it was, well, Trey McBride's a really good player, and he could be the tight end of their future, and here we are, man. This was an outstanding year for Trey McBride. Really, a Pro Bowl caliber type of season. It's tough when you're competing with George Kittle and Sam Laporta, who had great years, but in any normal year, Trey McBride had that type of year. 81 catches, 825 yards. It was probably the touchdowns that held him back, just 3 touchdowns. But you got to remember, he played the first half of the year with Josh Dobbs as his quarterback. And then once Kyler came back, man, you could tell, there's a chemistry there, dude. He had 2 games with 10 receptions, came close in other games. What's most impressive about Trey McBride, though, is he went 11 for 15 on contested catch targets. That's 73%. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that's more than any player that received more than 10 contested catch targets this year. He was really bodying guys out, attacking the football, and was Kyler Murray's trust guy in a pinch, and that connection's not going anywhere. I know they're probably bringing in a wide receiver early and all that, but in terms of being a quarterback's best friend, he was that. And this was something I talked about in the Cardinals deep dive, where he's a much better fit in this kind of Shanahan-style wide zone offense that Drew Petzing brought in, and that much was apparent as well. He's a very good run blocker, especially for a year 2 tight end. He's probably only going to get better there, but that's a big reason why they were, basically they phased out Zach Ertz so quickly, because Trey McBride actually blocks, and then
he can be a legitimate threat off of play action. And, you can kind of marry that run and pass together. So he's a great fit here, man. Target him in your fantasy lineups next year, man. He's I don't think going anywhere, even if they bring in other passing game options here. Was the best tight end in that draft class, in my opinion, and certainly is looking the part here heading into year 3. So he was a pretty easy star of the season pick for them. But let's talk about some of these other guys on the offense. James Conner actually had a career year. He looked outstanding. For those that were able to stomach Cardinals games this year, you had to be impressed with James Conner. Ends up with 1,000 yards for the first time in his career. Didn't fumble the ball once, by the way, on 208 attempts. He had a career high in missed tackles forced at 60. The highest he had ever had in a season was 40 in his first year in Arizona. So just that stiff arm and keeping those legs churning, running through contact, emphasized here by a career high in yards after contact. 3.93 yards after contact this year. That was actually number 1 in the NFL for players that played at least 50% of their team's snaps. Honestly, you could make a pretty strong case that just +1 up to an 82 is not enough for James Conner. But this is such an outlier on his career, a guy that is 29 years old. I'm not going to lie, I'm a James Conner fan, but I'm a little bit skeptical that he could repeat this type of efficiency. He was really on a mission this year. But if he starts looking like this again next year and those efficiency numbers are looking good again early in the year, he could actually be a pretty fast riser next year if he shows that this is the new James Conner here at 29 years old. But I think there's good reason to believe he might regress back to where he's been throughout his career, but still deserves some credit for an outstanding season here in Arizona. In a year where a lot of people thought he would get kind of phased out here in the new regime, maybe a scheme fit that theoretically wasn't the best for him, but he really made it work and impressed. But let's talk about these other receiving weapons other than Trey McBride. I am going to lower Marquise Brown. I know he dealt with injuries down the stretch, but just couldn't really get on the same page with Kyler Murray within this new system, and he's going to hit free agency. I still think Marquise Brown can be one of the better deep threats in the league, one of those like key Y receivers, one of those key Z receivers, a deep threat, a guy that can take the top off. I think he's a very confidence-based player, and once he gets kind of checked out, it's hard for him to check back in. So he's going to be very interesting to see where he goes. I actually still like him in Arizona if they can get him back for cheap. They did trade a first-round pick to get him, and I think once he could become more of a complementary piece with a number 1 wide receiver and Trey McBride and all this stuff, I think there's a world where they get this thing back on track, but definitely has to come down for really a second disappointing year in a row here. And then Greg Dortch did step up here in the second half of the year. I mean, they just had to play him. He's too skilled at wide receiver. We always say, oh, he's too talented. Not really with Greg Dortch. He is 5'8". He's not the fastest guy, but he just understands the wide receiver position. Like, if you could put him in Marquise Brown's body, you might be talking about like Antonio Brown, Marquise Brown's cousin, but not so much with Greg Dortch. But they line him up all over the field. He even went up, I think it was the Rams game against Trey Hodges-Tomlinson. This was one of my favorite plays of the year. They threw a fade in the red zone to Greg Dortch on Trey Tomlinson, which has got to be the shortest goal line fade attempt matchup in the history of the league. You got 5'7" Greg Dortch on like 5'7" Trey Tomlinson, and Dortch converted. He's got to have a role here as their wide receiver 4. He can play outside, he can play in the slot, he can return punts. He just gets it, man. He's a very valuable piece to have, even if you're never going to have crazy expectations or project a crazy stat line for him, but he's a very useful player. And then talk about useful players, man. Michael Wilson, yet again here in the NFL, struggled to stay on the field, and that was the thing that held him back at Stanford. But when he plays, dude, he's such a polished receiver for a rookie. Incredible routes. He showed sure hands here in his rookie season. Capped off his year with the best game of his season there, Week 18 against the Seahawks. And I just rave about the way this Cardinals receiving group is constructed. after they add, hopefully, a number one wide receiver, whether that's Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors, because, and I hope it's one of those two guys, because that vertical, like, alpha potential, I don't fully see in, like, Rome Odunze personally. I could easily be wrong about that, but I think Wilson and Odunze are a little bit more redundant. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Michael Wilson as the kind of number two wide receiver here is perfect, because he's an excellent route runner, a true possession receiver. Not the best speed. Like, I don't think he's ever going to be a number one, but man, he showed he can play as long as he stays healthy, and was fun to see him get out there and make an impact year one. And then they also picked up Elijah Higgins, who was a 6th-round pick out of Stanford for the Dolphins. And, you know, the Dolphins continue to have this, like, infatuation with these speed tight ends, and then they just never know how to use them. And they stumbled into that with Elijah Higgins. But in Arizona, where you've got Drew Petzing, who doesn't mind getting into 12 personnel and can find a use for, like, an undersized, like, wing tight end that's not really playing in line, but kind of flexed, towards the wing, obviously, as your number two tight end. If he's got a block, it's usually on a lighter, like, slot corner, strong safety type, and then you can kind of get him lost on play action. I mean, that's a great spot for Elijah Higgins as a potential number two tight end for them. I didn't love his wide receiver tape, but he does make sense as a tight end convert. And as long as the coaching and effort is there from Elijah Higgins, he could really be a great complement to Trey McBride, just as a guy that can give you 1 or 2 catches a week and frustrate you. Let's talk about the offensive line. I do have a note that Paris Johnson, one of my guys in this draft, that I still think is properly rated there as a 73. He had his ups and downs early in the year, but I felt like the last 6 weeks of the year, he really settled in and got comfortable there at right tackle. Again, he's played right tackle before, but I think it was like maybe his freshman year at Ohio State, or maybe his sophomore year. But either way, it's been a while. And even in, like, training camp, they were trying him at guard and weren't really sure where they were going to use him right away. Well, really settles in at right tackle, and I thought he looked the part. Did collect 12 penalties this year, not ideal, but it is certainly encouraging to see him settle down there. And I think as you look towards year 2, you can feel really confident that they've hit on this draft pick. He was probably firmly like the 24th best right tackle in the league, but for a rookie, even if it was a top 6 pick, you'll still take that. So I did have a note on him that he played much better down the stretch. But Hjalte Froholt, the center, full-time starter this year for the first time in his career, at least getting through a full season. He stepped in as a center for the Browns in 2022, followed his coordinator over here, and man, he's a good player, dude. Arkansas is becoming like center university. You've got Ragnow. There was the kid that went to Washington. I think there's someone else I'm forgetting. There's one in this draft, Hjalte Froholt now. Like, man, they're churning out centers out of Arkansas right now. And, Froholt is a really good fit for this system. He is an aggressive run blocker. He's a pretty solid athlete. You know, he was a 4th-round pick for the Patriots back in 2019. He just never really got an opportunity there in New England, and has really developed nicely. I think he's their starting center heading into next year, and then they just got to figure out their guard position. But, yeah, he's impressed. And then Tristan Colon, another guy that the Ravens liked, and anytime the Ravens like a guy and then he doesn't make it in Baltimore, you want to kind of give him a second look, because they tend to have a pretty good eye for who they bring in at the offensive line over there in Baltimore. And Tristan Colon, even if he was undrafted, I think was a draftable prospect. Anyway, the Cardinals doing what they were supposed to do this year and just kind of shuffle through players and try to find role players and potential starters and all that stuff. They ended up playing Tristan Colon a good bit down the stretch. He never really solidified this starting job, and it's just a +4 from 59 to a 63. So we're not going overboard, and certainly he's not penciled in as their starter or anything next year. But an interesting name that I think has shown he can be a practical backup. He stepped in and gave them some good reps at pass protection, kind of in and out throughout the second half of the year. So, Tristan Colon. And then let's talk about this defense. It is a lot of role players and guys that I think carved out roles as backups for this team. as they fill out this roster and get more starters. But those guys still deserve their credit, right? So Dante Stills was a day 3 pick out of West Virginia and played a lot of snaps. I'll say that. Ended up with, I think, 20 defensive stops, had some pass rush wins. Like, you're going to accidentally have some good plays when you're super athletic like Dante Stills, and he takes chances. Gets blown off the ball. He's a kind of 4-eye, 5-tech, 3-tech. Like, you have to put him on a slant at the shade of an offensive lineman. He's not a 2-gapping defensive tackle. He's not really a polished pass rusher either, but as a rotational kind of 3-4 end on this team, he definitely has a role, and I don't expect that they want to see him getting 600 snaps again in the future. I think they hope they get better players that can eat those snaps, but you cut that down and bring him off the bench with his experience and versatility. Like, he's a decent NFL player. And then Roy Lopez, who they brought home, was from the University of Arizona. Didn't work out for the Houston Texans, but they bring him over, and he was very stout as a run defender. Another guy that ended up eating a good amount of snaps into the second half of the year, and I think can be, him and Dante Stills can be very solid rotational defensive tackle depth as they hopefully for the Cardinals can go from starters to backups for them next year. Now, someone that I think they're hoping can continue to get better and become a starter for them is B.J. Ojulari, who they spent that high second-round pick on. And it took a little while for Ojulari to really get any sort of significant snap counts. He came out in the first couple months of the year, was only playing about 10, 15 snaps a game, just not really much of an opportunity to do much at all. But once you got down to the last couple months, they were playing him, more like 30 snaps a game, really seeing what he can do. And it was a little hit or miss, I will say. He ended up with 4 sacks, 20 pressures on 161 pass rush snaps. But there was definitely some impressive highlight wins in there, and it was enough to say you like what you see, and we'll see what year 2 brings to the table for Ojulari. And then Dennis Gardeck, Dennis the Menace, really just all season long, man. I don't think going into the year they really wanted to play Dennis Gardeck a lot, but they definitely had to. They had no semblance of a pass rush whatsoever. And as this team was competitive and they wanted to try to win some of these games, he was really the only guy in a big spot that it felt like could actually get home to the quarterback and get you a game-changing pass rush. Not a traditional rusher, right? He's 6 foot, 235, white dude out of Sioux Falls. But he's got a great first step. He's got bend. He's got a variety of different rush moves. He's a player. I think in an ideal world, he's more of a DPR, a designated pass rusher that you can bring in certain spots. He's 29 years old. I don't know what kind of future he really has, but either way, it was a very impressive season for Dennis Gardeck. And then Zaven Collins, who this team made a very fascinating decision to take the former first-round linebacker and move him to edge, where he's a big-bodied linebacker, and I thought his linebacker tape was pretty good. But he was an excellent blitzer, right? And they said, okay, you're probably more built like an edge rusher. We run this kind of off-ball or stand-up, on-ball, rather, edge front, where we want these edge guys to be able to twist, to be able to drop into coverage, to be able to move, really. And they said, okay, this is an interesting fit. And they gave it a go. And it had mixed results, but I would say was certainly better than I expected, and I can kind of see the vision for him to be sort of like a Kyle Van Noy or Andrew Van Ginkel type, where he is at least someone that can continue to get better as a pass rusher and be one of the 64 best edge rushers in the league in terms of just rushing the passer, and then do what he did this year right away, which was be a very stout physical run defender up front, be someone that can be an interesting chess piece for different blitz looks and twists and stuff, and then drop into coverage and use that linebacker experience off the line of scrimmage and throw off some of the quick game elements that teams want to run against blitz looks and stuff. So I do see the vision. And in terms of the pass rushing production, as you would expect, he wasn't great. I think he was 68th out of 100 something in pass rush win rate. you wouldn't really expect a guy that's never really played off the edge to come in and have a variety of pass rush moves and be constantly destroying guys. So we'll see in time kind of where that goes. But I'm not going to lie, man. Jonathan Gannon earned a lot of respect from me in a lot of different ways this year, and I can see where Zaven Collins can turn into a very good player for them. Maybe not return like top 16 pick value for them, but I will say like a good number 2 edge rusher is more valuable than just a solid linebacker, which Zaven Collins was. So it makes a little bit of sense. Let's talk about the secondary here. Kytrell Clark definitely dealt with injuries, but in the final 2 games of his season, I want to say week 12 and week 13, were his best starts of the year. Another guy that I don't think they would necessarily want him to be a starter next year, but a guy that showed he can come in, get some starts as a rookie out the gate. I think a 5th-round pick, a really like a high IQ zone corner with a good first step, a good fit for this off-zone kind of Fangio-inspired defense here. So, maybe someday he turns into a good starter, but good to see some flash starts. And then Antonio Hamilton, he's come around, man. He's been playing for like 3 years now in Arizona because their secondary has been a disaster, and he was a part of that disaster. Like going back to 2021, I felt like he cost that team games back when they were still trying to win at a competitive level. But he's kept his head down, continued to just get reps, and his consistency is really seeing an uptick. And then you put him in this system that we just talked about, being a very zone-heavy defense that can let these more veteran, high zone IQ, communication-heavy guys that are just good with their eyes on the quarterback, it can let these guys thrive. Like, it reminds me a lot of Rasul Douglas in Green Bay and now Buffalo. Antonio Hamilton, fairly similar skill set there, where he's got some size, but he's just not the best athlete on the field by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, very solid second half of the year for Antonio Hamilton. I do think he will be a starter for them. I just think they probably hope he can be a number 2 guy for them and not a number 1 as he was this year. Then you've got Jalen Thompson, the safety behind these guys. Was excited to see how he would look in this new system, and he was very comfortable, just very solid in coverage all year long, deserved a slight bump. And then Andre Cheshire, he's been a practice squatter, a small school guy out of San Jose State, but a very good athlete, has actually gotten substantial playing time here in Arizona. I think he had over 500 snaps and just kind of doing a little bit of everything. Slot corner, strong safety, free safety, but made some plays on the ball, was solid in coverage. Just a fun little dime back and a athletic veteran that's made the climb to some more playing time here in Arizona. I think can definitely be back next year as a backup and a potential kind of starting dime back as he was this year yet again. Then next up, we have the San Francisco 49ers. In other words, the team that all of the fans of the other NFC West teams can blame for making them wait this long for their team and studs and duds, as the Niners go on a deep playoff run here. And for their star of the season, I am going to go with Brock Purdy, the quarterback here. And really, if for no reason other than just to use this as a good opportunity to kind of talk him up and defend my boy Brock Purdy a little bit, like I really think the narrative on him is unfair. Like, I think people criticize Brock Purdy for obviously having a surrounding cast and getting a lot of help and not having the strongest arm and being Mr. Irrelevant and perhaps having a slightly punchable face. They criticize him as if there are really people out there saying he is a surefire top 10 quarterback or anything crazy. Now, I get it. He was in the MVP discussion for a little bit there, and I understand if you wanted to push back on that because, look, the fact is he's got an incredible surrounding cast. But I do think the hate has gone quite far on Brock Purdy. He is a much better quarterback than anyone that Kyle Shanahan has had in San Francisco. The dude threw for 5,000 yards this year, 34 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 32 big-time throws to 21 turnover-worthy plays. And I really don't see anybody out there saying Brock Purdy is some game-breaking quarterback or that he's carrying this team or anything like that, yet people hate on him for that. Now, there will come a time where some of these pieces get older and have to leave and they have to make a contract decision on Brock Purdy, and there might be some very real conversations to have about if he can be the sort of long-term $45-50 million quarterback in that kind of way, and there will be a time for that. But where we're at right now, man, Brock Purdy is a very good quarterback, and I want to praise him. I think he is firmly in that tier 3 of quarterbacks. I think it's funny the amount of hate that Brock Purdy gets when he's a very similar quarterback, in my opinion, to Jalen Hurts. In that, I mean, there's obviously more to it, but both Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts have done a good job of playing in structure, taking what's there, making the most out of an incredible surrounding cast around him, and then if that first read isn't there, he's going to improvise. He's going to make something happen, where Purdy is super underrated with his ability to get out of the pocket, see the field on the move, show that hip torque, get the ball out, make those tough throws on the run. And the last thing I'll say about Brock Purdy is he was a good enough quarterback for this 49ers team to win the Super Bowl. I know they did not end up winning, but process over results. I'm not blaming Brock Purdy for that loss. I'm blaming a fumbled punt that completely swung the game, Christian McCaffrey for fumbling, a blocked PAT. Brock Purdy did his job, was good enough to get the 49ers there, had some incredible comeback moments, even if he had some, worse plays in the games before that. And I think he'll be a big part of why this team can be right back there next year. But I wanted to take this opportunity to defend Brock Purdy a little bit, unless people are out there comparing him to Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert or what Matthew Stafford did this year. I don't see that, yet people freak out as if people are putting Brock Purdy up there. But, people say this guy is just another Jimmy Garoppolo, and I'm like, I don't know, man. I think he's a much better quarterback than that. So Brock Purdy's going to go up, and I think 80 rating is a pretty good mark for where he's at right now. But let's talk about some of these other players here. Wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, I think, did everything he needed to this year to say that he's a number one wide receiver in the NFL. He's really completely rounded out his game. He's always, I don't want to say just flashed great routes and flashed great catches. Like, it's been more than just flashes, but now it's like he is cemented. He is an awesome route runner. He is full-sized. He has great athleticism. Just 2 drops this season. 50% contested catch percentage. Was a vertical threat. Was an intermediate threat. Was a run-after-catch threat. What else do you want to see from this guy? And there was some posts that came out from a close friend of Brandon Ayuk that was like, we're out of San Francisco, Las Vegas, here we come, or something like that. I'm not going to look too far into that, but I did tweet this out. I said, if there is any player, and I've talked about this, if there's any player in the league that has every right to say, look, San Fran, I'm thankful you drafted me. I want to be here, but there ain't no effing way I'm playing on the 5th-year option. Like, every receiver that plays at the level he has is going to get that contract before being asked to play on that 5th-year deal. Coming back, risking injury, risking more of a down year and a non-repeat of a borderline all-pro type of season, it's just not worth it for Ayuk. As great as this team is and as fun as it is to play for this team, Ayuk has to take care of himself too. So it will be a situation, I think. Hopefully the Niners can work it out where they pay him, because he is the downfield option for this team. They obviously have these incredible playmakers, but Debo, McCaffrey, Kittle, Jennings, these guys are all, I would say, at their best in the short to intermediate game. Ayuk's the guy that can take the top off the defense and obviously led this team in receiving yards this year. So he's integral. He knows it. The Niners know it. We'll see how the situation plays out. But I am also going to raise one of those short to intermediate masters in Jawan Jennings. Just honestly one of the more, like, I can't say best playoff runs or anything like that. That's an overreaction. But in terms of just a legend and a guy that, 10 years from now when there's the joke that goes around about like how guys will just sit around and name old football players. Juwan Jennings is going to be a legacy player that we remember because he plays football like we on our couches like to imagine that we would play if we were out there, where he blocks his absolute ass off. He, as they said on the broadcast, wants to take your head off as a wide receiver. He's awesome, man. He's not fast. He's not even like, I don't want to dunk on his route running. He actually runs really good routes in the short game, but he's not a vertical threat, right? But when you have all these other pieces and the defense is directing all their attention on Ayuk and Kittle and McCaffrey and Debo, Juwan Jennings is just chilling underneath uncovered, and he will make you pay. And just the physicality in the run blocking, it's insane. His run blocking highlights are hilarious. Go find them. So love me some Juwan Jennings. Let's talk about the offensive line a little bit. And Colton McKivitz, the right tackle, he was fine this year. I feel like he became less of a problem, less of someone that you were thinking about as the season went on in terms of pass protection, and was a very steady run blocker all year long too. I mean, this team ran the ball incredibly well, and they didn't just have to run behind Trent Williams. Like, Colton McKivitz was getting out on the move, making some good blocks too. So he had a solid year. Still one of the more bottom-end right tackles in the league, but the Chiefs were trying to get Chris Jones isolated on McKivitz one-on-one, and I would say he actually held his own. He wasn't necessarily the problem with their pass protection, in my opinion, in that Super Bowl. And then John Feliciano, who they started putting out there as a starter in the last couple months of this season. Spencer Bierford, they wanted to be a thing, but he ended up just kind of getting benched there at right guard, and we might as well just sneak that in. Like, he's going to go down. He was a problem for them. They ended up having to put him in there in the Super Bowl because Feliciano got hurt. He's the one that blew that big assignment on the fourth down in overtime. A 26 pass blocking grade this year for Spencer Bierford, and it felt that way. 9 penalties, so he's going to come down. He definitely didn't work out as he was their day one start at right guard, and they had to go find a different option there, and that was John Feliciano, who's the 32-year-old veteran, who's another just very physical guy. I always like to imagine John Feliciano has an Italian accent and is like the mafia type of offensive lineman out there. Probably not the case, but sometimes with his run blocking, you see him getting into the second level, burying linebackers, and you're like, yeah, I mean, that guy's got to have an Italian accent and a Jesus Christ necklace around his neck, right? But yeah, Feliciano did a good job for them. It was a bummer he got hurt in the Super Bowl. Let's flip over and talk about this defense. And Javon Kinlaw, dude, like, better late than never, right? He ended up with 35 pressures, which is more in this season than he had in his first 3 years combined. The former first-round pick that was supposed to be their DeForest Buckner replacement. Still a long-ass way to go until then. In fact, he's going to be a pending free agent, and I don't know that they're going to be able to get him back. So that ship as the Buckner replacement has certainly sailed officially at this point, I would say, unless he's back on the cheap, I guess is possible. But anyway, better late than never. He had a good year as a pass rusher, still a complete liability as a run defender. Though he kind of toughened up with some better run defense performances down the stretch, I suppose, if you put any weight into PFF grades and run stops and that kind of thing. So, we'll see, man. He's got the athleticism. He was the 14th overall pick for a reason. If he's matured and has devoted some time to his game, which I think has been his problem, and he's stayed healthy, which has definitely helped as well, maybe he can have a little bit of a late career resurgence here. But then let's talk about Randy Gregory, who actually, under the radar, had a really bad season. He ended up obviously getting released in Denver, and then San Francisco brings him in, basically chasing the idea that, well, Randy Gregory, for the last 3, 4, 5 years, really throughout his career, the case has been when he's available, he's a good player. So bring him in for free and hope he's available. Well, this year, he was available. He was never really injured. He was out there playing a good 20 up to 30 snaps a game for this team, but was just not effective, man. He had 12 out of 15 games for San Francisco. He had one or fewer pressure. Was, as he's been as well, a very poor run defender. And at 31 years old, it certainly feels like he's not much of an impact player at this point. Now, he did have a nice play in the Super Bowl, maybe saved his best for last. Had a good rep where Mahomes broke contain and Randy Gregory was able to track him down, get him down before he scrambled for a first down, forced a punt. We always say Mahomes is faster than the guy chasing him at all times, and he was not faster than Randy Gregory, but yeah, obviously something's going on, man. His production has fallen off a cliff. He's 31 years old, was released by the Denver Broncos just into year 2 of a big contract he got, so would not expect much for Gregory. I imagine he will be another kind of mercenary pickup for a championship contender next year, but yeah, it certainly is looking like the beginning of the end for Gregory. Now, into the secondary, the linebackers aren't going to move. Fred and Greenlaw are, rated properly, I would say, as probably the best linebacker duo in the league. But these corners really bunkered down the stretch, especially Charvarius Ward, who I thought about making the star of the season. I mean, Ward has just been taking leaps for several years now, going back to his final year in Kansas City that got him paid here in San Francisco. But he's been even better here in San Fran, building upon back-to-back years to the point that Charvarius Ward's he's a top 10 cornerback in the NFL. He's one of the best press players in the league. He's always at guys' hip pocket. He is a bit grabby, penalized 12 times. It comes with the territory. But he's become a more heady zone player as he gets more reps, as he spends more time in the system. I mean, he had 17 pass breakups, 5 interceptions this year, was credited with just 3 touchdowns allowed. Really one of the best cover players in the league, and he's a physical run defender that's going to help take things away when you try to get to the perimeter in the run game. So, yeah, Char Ward deserves a ton of praise here. He's even been a bargain for what they paid him in free agency because he's been better than the player he was when they signed him. And then Deommodore Lenoir, he's really coming to his own here in San Francisco too. He was a late season breakout for them last year, really started to get comfortable here. And then this year he's impressed, not just with his overall coverage ability, but in his ability to slide inside and be a slot corner. He's incredibly versatile. He can move inside, move outside when they want to be in base personnel or 4-3, if you can even call that base anymore. But when they want to be in 2 cornerback looks, he can play outside. When they get into nickel, he can step inside. Remarkable run defender. I mean, that's something they always prioritize with their slot corner, is that physicality. It's why they signed Isaiah Oliver, who had a solid season when they used him in this slot, but they always loved K'Wan Williams there. Deommodore Lenoir, I didn't really know he had that in him, where he was just this kind of off-zone space player at Oregon State. Well, he's really refined and fully tooled his game here for San Francisco. So as a number 2 running man with Charvarius Ward, absolutely works. And then Ambry Thomas they would bring in a lot of times for those nickel packages when they would slide Lenoir inside. And he was much more streaky, like Green Bay and Detroit in the playoffs definitely would see Ambry Thomas come in and be like, okay, we can take advantage of that matchup. And he's not the stickiest cover corner, but he did have some good games this year, and I think deserves to go up for his overall picture, even if it's more of a up and down product. He's probably more of a CB4 type, and you put that guy into more of a starting role, and you're going to get some hiccup games. So that's fine. That it is what it is. Reminds me a little bit, actually, of Eli Apple, honestly, in terms of just player style and quality, where you might get a hot streak on a playoff run where he makes some plays, but if you ask him to play the course of a season, he's probably going to give up a good 800 yards, 4 touchdowns, have some really ugly games. It kind of feels like Ambry Thomas to me. And then at safety, Jair Brown, he was kind of ooh and ah pick when they took him, because I was not the biggest Jair Brown guy. I think I had a fifth to a sixth round grade on him. But just an ultra physical, high IQ safety. It's just his coverage ability wasn't really anything special. And, I don't know that he was like some great cover safety for the Niners. I know he had 3 interceptions kind of end up in his lap. We'll see. I mean, I'm going to be watching more All-22 for the Niners deep dive, and he's definitely going to be a player I'm going to have my eye on, because they did spend a 3rd round pick on him. But one thing about Jair Brown that he did at Penn State and why it was such a easy fit in San Francisco is, even if he isn't the biggest guy, he would come down into the box and just thump as if he was, I don't know, CJ Mosley or something. Just pulling a name out of a hat there. But he does not care that he's 5'11", 200 pounds. He would take on offensive linemen. He would stack and shed and take on running backs with reckless abandon. And that's why the Niners loved him. It's like Talanoa Hufanga all over again. So it made sense that Hufanga goes down. They need another big physical smart safety, or at least a safety that plays big, and he was able to step into that role pretty well. So, really good year for Jair Brown. Definition of why you talk about, like, front office continuity, knowing your system, knowing your coaches, and, like, knowing what types of players are going to work for you, and Jair Brown absolutely filled into that. And then, hey, Jake Moody, I told all you idiots that you should draft kickers in the 3rd round. No, I still would not recommend 3rd round for kickers. Although this Alabama kid coming out looks like he might be someone with that profile. But anyway, Jake Moody, from like we left off after week 7, where he had missed a bunch of kicks. He had missed 3 field goals the 2 weeks before that. He really settled in and was much more solid. He still missed some kicks. Had a big miss against Detroit. Kind of pulled that PAT a little low in the Super Bowl, but hey, he made 2 huge 50-plus yarders in the Super Bowl. Probably his best game as a kicker, so early in his career. So we're gonna give him a little bit of love. I'm still not convinced that he's a great kicker, but certainly ended on a pretty good note there for Jake Moody. Then next up, we have the LA Rams, who have a lot of players to talk about here. What did they roster? Like 20-something rookies or something crazy? And anytime you have that, a lot of kind of new faces, a lot of players getting opportunities. We're going to have a lot of ratings to adjust here. So this is going to be a fun one. But we're going to start with the star of the season that, even if they had some major risers this year, Puka Nacua is an easy choice for star of the season here. I mean, where do you even want to start with him? You can talk about the offensive rookie of the year race where, I mean, if this wasn't a year where CJ Stroud comes out and has one of the best rookie quarterback seasons ever, Puka Nacua would have been a runaway offensive rookie of the year, breaks the receiving yardage record. You could make a case that relative to his position group, Puka Nacua was even better than CJ Stroud, and that's saying a lot because CJ Stroud looked like a top 10 quarterback this year, but Puka Nacua really a all-pro caliber season, and he keeps it up through the season. Like, he came out extremely hot. What did he have? Like, Jesus, I don't even know, but he broke the record for like targets and receptions out the gate for a rookie wide receiver. And it was like, yeah, he's fun, but Cooper Kupp will come back and they'll kind of retake his role, and Puka Nacua will fade away as a day 3 pick. No, Puka Nacua overtook Cooper Kupp's target share in this offense. In a lot of ways, he was the dynamic number 1 target for this team, and he earned it, man. We get so obsessed about player comps and who's this guy like, what's his upside. Puka Nacua is his own guy. I don't think there's a guy in the NFL right now that you look at Puka Nacua and say he could become that guy, but I do think he can become, if he isn't already, a top 10 receiver in the league, maybe even more than that. I don't know, but one guy he does remind me of is Steve Smith, where He's just so incredibly physical. I mean, Puka Nacua trucked through a defensive end, a 260-pound defensive end, to fight for a tough first down in that playoff game against the Lions, where, by the way, he had 180 yards. He was making incredible catches down the field, over the middle. And then you get into his run after catch ability, where he's so underrated. He kind of has that Deebo Samuel, maybe Michael Pittman-esque ability where he's actually faster once the ball gets in his hand. His game speed with the pads on is really incredible. You can line him up outside as well. He can work the sidelines. Really can do everything with Puka Nacua. He is incredible. So, a easy star of the season candidate for Puka. Can't wait to see kind of where is the ceiling on Puka for his career, because we certainly, I don't think, have seen it already. But let's talk about the rest of this offense, and there's some young players throughout this team we got to talk about, but not so much a young player here. Matthew Stafford at 36 years old, getting a +2 here. Honestly, having a career year for Matthew Stafford from start to finish, with that Seahawks game, week 1, out the gate, just dicing up that secondary, pulling off an upset, and really announced to the world that the Rams are going to be a good football team this year, because the Rams were big underdogs in that game. The Seahawks had expectations, and Matthew Stafford said, hold my beer, we got this year. And I don't think we mentioned Stafford's name enough in terms of being genuinely one of the best quarterbacks in the league this year as an MVP candidate. I'm not saying Lamar didn't deserve the MVP, and surely Matthew Stafford missing a couple games in the middle of the season, and the Rams, quote-unquote, only winning 10 games or whatever it is, as opposed to the 13 that the Ravens won. You know, based on how you vote on MVP, I get it. But in terms of the level of quarterback that Matthew Stafford played at, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league this year, and took a Rams team that my idiot self and really everybody else had no expectations for. I ranked them 31st, and no one really was like, you're too low on the Rams, because this team had a rough year last year. We didn't know what the health of these veterans was going to be, and Stafford just went pedal to the metal. A couple more things to say about Stafford here. I think his ability to attack the intermediate middle of the field is the best in the National Football League right now. The way that he can anticipate and just snipe those intermediate digs and crossing routes to these guys like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and even Tutu Atwell at times this year. His accuracy to attack that part of the field it's remarkable, and his comfort within this system that is really good at attacking that part of the field is a really nice natural complement. So I really think from a throw-in, throw-out perspective, Matthew Stafford had a career year. The volume, maybe not necessarily, because he did miss a few games in the middle of the year there, but I think he's playing the best football of his career, and there's no reason to believe he can't get the Rams even better next year. But let's talk about the guys around him. At running back, Kyren Williams would have been a star of the season candidate for a lot of teams. He's gone up 15 ratings points throughout the season. Just a complete breakout there at running back, all the way up to an 83. And I'll continue to say the point I've said about Kyren Williams in that he is one of maybe the 3 to 5 most skilled running backs in the league in terms of vision, patience, setting up blocks, finding holes that a lot of running backs can't see or find. He's incredible at that. There's no business for a slow 5'9", 195-pound running back to be one of the most productive backs in the league, but he makes it work. He has become a much better player than I ever saw him be coming out of Notre Dame. You know, I thought he was going to be kind of like a third down back, a guy that was a sneaky good runner, but certainly not one of the guys that leads the league in rushing yards. And in fact, he's actually needs to show more in the receiving game. He had a bunch of drops and wasn't that good in the receiving game, which is actually a big surprise considering he was so good at it at Notre Dame. So if that part of his game can come along, I mean, talk about Kyren Williams maybe next year blowing up even more. But yeah, just such an instinctive runner, and he's clearly, he puts his time in the weight room, and not just like, pumping biceps and doing leg day and that kind of stuff. I would bet Kyren Williams does a lot of stretching and pliability work and really works on those core muscles, because his contact balance is really good, even though he's 200 pounds soaking wet. And that comes down to balance and pliability and that kind of stuff. So I think he takes very good care of himself in that way. I'm speculating, but I can only imagine based on the amount of tackles he's able to miss and the balance he shows. But the other back here, Royce Freeman, he did have to really get a hefty workload there in the middle chunk of the season when Kyren Williams went down. The run game certainly wasn't the same, but Royce Freeman, who's been around the league for 6 years, probably had his most efficient season on a yards per carry basis. Deserves a little bit of love for what he did there. And then with the other wide receivers here, I am actually going to lower Cooper Kupp. He's one of these guys that, he had that monster season, became one of these elite premium rated players, and there's never really been like a aha moment of like, we got to lower Cooper Kupp. It's more of a looking back on the last couple of years where he hasn't been that guy he was in 2021. I just don't think Cooper Kupp is one of the 5 best receivers in the league at this point in time. He's 31 years old. He was frankly severely outplayed by Puka Nacua this year. He still played 13 games, but only 764 yards, 5 touchdowns. His elusiveness after the catch wasn't nearly the same. His yards per route run was half, basically, of what it was in that 2021 season. Contested catch percentage was down. Obviously, I still think Cooper Kupp is a very talented wide receiver, but I just think it's time to remove him from that Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb level, and more bring him down at this point, into that next group of guys with like Keenan Allen and company. Like, obviously still an incredible wide receiver, and I hope he can have better health moving forward, because he has been getting banged up the last couple of years. I think that's potentially slowing him down at his age a little bit. But yeah, I don't even think Rams can really argue with a pretty substantial drop there for Cooper Kupp based on where we had him rated. And then Demarcus Robinson actually stepped in off the street, had to play when Tutu Atwell was gone for basically the second half of the year for the Rams. And Demarcus Robinson looked really good. He was like really reliable for Stafford, was a nice target down in the red zone, showed some good separation ability, just looked the part of like he stepped in and played like a starting caliber receiver for the Rams. He's been kind of a wide receiver 4 type throughout his career. I am not saying someone should bring him in to be a wide receiver 2 or anything like that, but definitely I think earned himself some money, and whether that's here for the Rams or somewhere else, I think can be a nice piece in a wide receiver group moving forward based on the tape we saw this year. Then let's talk about these tight ends. Davis Allen, the rookie out of Clemson, who I liked coming out, but he was weird, a bit of a weird prospect, because he was only like 240-something pounds, a little bit on the lighter side for a tight end, wasn't much of a blocker, and despite being lighter, really not a good athlete at all. But what you love about Davis Allen was he's lengthy, he's got huge hands, and he catches everything. And sure enough, he gets out there the last couple weeks of the year, including the playoff game, got some big-time targets from Stafford, and just hands like glue. Very minor workload, just a few catches, but the guy we saw at Clemson seems to be translating so far here for the Rams. And with Tyler Higbee at 31 years old now, having the year he just had, I do wonder if they might look to save a little bit of money here. It would have to be a post-June 1st cut for them to save any money, but they can save, I think, like $5 million in cap space. I don't know if that's necessary or not, but Tyler Higbee was very much just a guy this year. And even going back to last year, he wasn't great. Over the last 2 years, he's only come down with 6 out of 21 contested catch targets. And that's kind of the selling point on Tyler Higbee, is he's not a great athlete, he's not some great separator, but when he got this big contract for the Rams, the idea was he's a reliable, big-bodied tight end. He hasn't been that. He's also had drops. He's not much of a blocker. again, very much just a guy. I think Davis Allen or Hunter Long, who they brought in, can do exactly what Tyler Higbee has done for them. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's done for the Rams, though that contract was pretty hefty and isn't super easy to get out of. So it might be one more year of Higbee, but it's certainly not trending in the right direction as he gets older. But let's talk about this offensive line. Really stepped up. One of the most surprising units this season. Obviously, Puka, a big surprise. Stafford and his health. Kyren Williams. Lots of surprises for the Rams, but honestly, the biggest of which I think is the offensive line being as good as it was. Especially at left tackle there. That looked like a major area of weakness with Joe Noteboom and obviously Alaric Jackson heading into the year, an undrafted year 3 player out of Iowa. Really no reason to believe that he could have been a starting caliber left tackle, but he's really worked at it and was a very solid left tackle for the Rams, to the point that I think they could start him again next year and feel okay about that position, but also just his development in general. He is an interesting profile for an undrafted guy. Reminds me a little bit, actually, of Rasheed Walker, who we talked about for the Packers, where early in his college career was viewed as like a potential first-round pick, a high recruiting background, but things just fell off later in his career in the Big Ten there. Alaric Jackson coming out of Iowa, showed up at the Senior Bowl, just didn't really look in shape, and I think he has matured a lot and has become much more of a professional, and if that's the case, he's not your average sort of undrafted tackle here. So I think if they go with him at left tackle, it wouldn't be a huge surprise. And if he continues to be on this trajectory, he could become, dare I say, a franchise left tackle. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But I think still needs to add more play strength and become a better run blocker. But overall, he was not a problem for them at left tackle. Certainly allowed this passing game to be as efficient as it was. And then it keeps going. You've got Steve Avila, the rookie at left guard, incredibly solid. Had a couple of hiccup moments. Sometimes some teams were able to isolate him and get him in pass protection, which it's going to happen for any rookie. But, he, for the most part, was a very solid pass protector, just as he was at TCU. And I think was an even better run blocker here than he was at TCU. Getting them, kind of just moving a little bit more. TCU is a very head-up run-blocking game. And I think that their ability to, they obviously like wide zone here with the Rams, but they became much more of a power run game than they've ever been. Able to kind of weaponize him in the run game a little bit more than TCU was, showing a little bit more athleticism than again, I think he was able to show at TCU. So just a very solid rookie year. Looks like an easy hit for them. But an even bigger hit, honestly, was them going to get Kevin Dotson and bringing him over from the Steelers, who never should have let this player go. They gave him away for peanuts, and he was one of the, I will just play it safe and say one of the 10 best guards in the NFL. But I think he was closer to 5 than he was 10 this year. Actually gave up more pressures than he ever has in terms of pass protection, but was still very solid. But the thing with Kevin Dotson is he's always graded out as an incredible pass blocker and not so much as a run blocker. Well, again, he comes to the Rams where they were able to kind of get him on the move, get him matched up on linebackers more often, find that second level, as opposed to much more of a stagnant head-up run blocking scheme that they ran in Pittsburgh with a lot of duo and inside zone. Well, much more wide zone, pin pull, counter, that kind of stuff here for the Rams. And Dotson showed that he's got a mean streak when he's on the move. He had some incredible impact blocks once he was able to clear into that second level. And again, like Steve Avila, going from TCU to here, showed more athleticism than I think Pittsburgh allowed him to show. So these two guys, these two guards, again, the guard position was a huge question coming into the year, and it ended up being a strength for the Rams this year. And then even the center, Coleman Shelton, who we actually lowered in the last episode of Studs and Duds, he's going to get a +1 here. We lowered him because he was showing to be a bit of a problem in pass protection. And I don't know that I would change my opinion on that. I don't think he's a very good pass protecting center. He's very undersized. But as this run game got better as the year went on, and really just as we learned how good this team was as a running football team, because that hasn't always really been the identity of the Rams, but this year they were able to just dominate games on the ground. You notice that Coleman Shelton was a big part of that run game with his athleticism at that center position, being a nice pivot point and a guy that can get on the move. So his run blocking was better than we've ever seen for Coleman Shelton this year. But let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball, and we're going to start on the interior D-line with third-round pick Kobe Turner, who I think would have been my second-place vote, maybe third place behind Devon Witherspoon in Seattle, but was a legitimate Defensive Rookie of the Year candidate, especially when you look at the way he ended the season as this team really let him loose as a pass rusher. In the last 2 months of the season, Kobe Turner had 36 pressures and 9 sacks. I mean, that's insane. Like, you look at the run that Jalen Carter had to start the year, that's basically what Kobe Turner did to finish the year. And honestly, those two players, in terms of just overall production, ended up very close. Jalen Carter ended up with 49 pressures, 7 sacks on 407 pass rush snaps. Kobe Turner ended up with 50 pressures and 12 sacks on 498 pass rush snaps. So I'm not trying to take down Jalen Carter. I'm trying to build up Kobe Turner and talk about just how big of a hit the Rams found here in the third round. And if anybody knows a little bit about hyper quick, undersized defensive tackles, it's the LA Rams. And he had a nice little mentor next to him named Aaron Donald, and I think was able to take a skill set in Kobe Turner's game that was very good, very underrated. I think a lot of people were surprised when he went in the third round. Even myself, I was surprised when he went in the third round. I liked Kobe Turner, but I didn't see him going that early. The Rams, though, Les Snead and company, great vision to bring him in and pair him with Aaron Donald, where you wouldn't think having a duo of, 285-pound defensive tackles can really work for you. They do make it work, and that's the Aaron Donald effect because of the attention he demands. But again, I think Kobe Turner in this situation where he's going to get a lot of single teams, being next to Aaron Donald there, paired with his technique and the mentorship of a guy like Aaron Donald to teach him how to win at that size in the NFL. Again, it really came together. He's a massive weapon for this defense. Their defense was very average this year, and that was not supposed to be the case. It really was Aaron Donald and nobody else on paper coming into the year, and this turned into one of the best pass rushing duos in the league this season, period, full stop. So what a find in the third round for this Rams front office that is impressing in other ways, right? Like they, for years, were the team that was changing the game with the aggressiveness and going for it and trading for the Von Millers and Jalen Ramseys, the Matthew Staffords, winning that way. Well, now they're showing that these guys can be incredible scouts and find guys like Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, Kobe Turner on day 3 of the draft, which is probably an even more impressive thing, right? Anybody can say, yeah, let's go trade for Matthew Stafford and Jalen Ramsey. It's a whole nother thing to draft a Kobe Turner sooner than everybody expects and for him to be one of the best rookies in the league. So just a massive tip of the cap. We're not done, though. There's a bunch of other guys in this defense that stepped up. Dejuan Johnson, not a ton to say. Very minimal snap count, but was rated very low as a day 3 pick out of Toledo. Clearly not what Kobe Turner is, but similar idea where they just took another dart throw on a tweener on the inside, and he held up okay in the 100 or so snaps he got. But then Bobby Brown has really come into his own. It was a very raw but fully built defensive tackle that they took, I think third round rather, out of Texas A&M. Always was a guy that I said definitely looks the part. He is built like a rhinoceros and just needed to learn the position. And again, pretty good mentor in that room with Aaron Donald. Bobby Brown is the one full-size defensive tackle that they have. It's all these Kobe Turner, Dejuan Johnson, Laurel Murchison, Jonah Williams played a big role for this team again this year. But when they do need to stop the run, they do need a nose tackle. They need someone that can two-gap and be a full-size guy that doesn't really get moved around the ball on a down block or whatever. That has been Bobby Brown. And they save him for those roles. He's the only interior player on this team that played more run defense snaps than pass rush snaps. And he definitely played a valuable role for this team. Seems to be coming along. Wouldn't be surprised if he's a bit of a breakout next year, handling a full snap count for him. He did miss some games too. We only played 13 games this year. But yeah, I like what we saw from Bobby Brown. And then Byron Young, the edge rusher out of Tennessee, a ton of production this year, right? You look at him on paper and say, oh, wow, 50 pressures, 8 sacks. That's a damn good year for a rookie. And you might say, wow, 74 rating from TFG is too low. Well, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek here. I think he was really impressive as a rookie to get almost 1,000 snaps here. Obviously, 50 pressures is a big deal, but he did have 500 pass rushing snaps. That's quite a lot. And was just around that pressure rate of about 10%, which is that of a kind of baseline starter in the NFL. He was quite low as well in pass rush win rate. Was 48th out of 55 eligible pass rushers. So, I think Byron Young has an incredible upside, but he doesn't really show you a lot of like pass rush moves, right? That's going to be the next step for him. There's no doubt he can play. He held up well against the run, was a nasty weapon on twists and stunts and games and stuff, and was, as I've talked about in the past, an excellent weapon with Aaron Donald, who's going to demand double teams, but he's also going to generate that interior pressure and flush the quarterback outside the pocket. What better than to have a lengthy, ultra-fast, 4.4 speed edge rusher with a high motor to chase down that quarterback? So he's still new to football. He had that interesting backstory as the guy that was working at the dollar store, tried out for a military academy, worked his way up to Tennessee, was 25 years old when he got drafted here. So year 2 is going to be a very interesting season for Byron Young. Is he just a cleanup guy benefiting from the Aaron Donald effect and a good player for them? Or can he really work at it and become a great player for him? Because the tools are all there. And then Michael Hoyt's also going to go up. Now, some people like to poke fun of Michael Hoyt because for some reason the Rams asked him, who's listed at 310 pounds. I think he plays at 280, 285. I think they just keep him listed at 310 to throw people off. But this was just bizarre, man. Michael Hoyt, who is the largest listed edge rusher in the National Football League, plays outside linebacker for the Rams. He dropped into coverage 39% of his snaps. That is 8% higher than Dennis Gardeck, Andrew Van Ginkel, Zaven Collins, Zach Bond, all of these like hybrid outside backer types. Michael Hoyt, more of a defensive tackle in build than edge, and he dropped into coverage more than anybody in the league. And it didn't really work. I don't really know why they did that, and I don't even really have a take about why that makes him any good. It's just pretty wild that they did that. But he did have 39 pressures on 371 pass rush snaps, 6 sacks. Holds up okay against the run at that size, and he is overall a very functional edge player. I just genuinely don't understand why they drop him into coverage so much, because it's just not fair to the guy. It's almost like, despite them dropping him into coverage more than anybody else, he still had a pretty solid season. So he's going to get a +3. I think he's more of a third edge and a different kind of chess piece type of defensive end / outside linebacker here, I guess, for a defense, as opposed to the starter that gets 1,000 snaps that he was this year. So hopefully they can find someone else, but still, Michael Hoyt, solid. But then into the second level, Ernest Jones had a massive breakout season for the Rams here. Really got unleashed after a year of learning. Next to Bobby Wagner, Ernest Jones himself came in this year, and you couldn't really watch a Rams game without being like, who the hell is 53? He is everywhere, man. His ability to just command the defense, be a physical presence over the middle of the field, a full-size linebacker, genuinely one of the best run-defending linebackers in the league this year. He's always been a fantastic tackler in terms of missed tackle percentage. Right around 7% this year. Very good. Did, unfortunately, probably have the worst game of his year against Detroit, with that group kind of running free there. But Jones, also a big reason you couldn't watch a Rams game without really noticing him, was he blitzed 141 times this year, ended up with 37 pressures and 6 sacks. So Raheem Morris was really letting him loose to be a playmaker. And part of that is he still hasn't fully got there as a coverage player, so they would rather use him as a blitzer than a coverage player a lot of times. But in terms of his growth, it's really impressive. He's heading into a contract year next year and is heading into that year as honestly one of the more underrated players at the entire position. So he's getting a lot of love here, +3. And then we've got into the secondary. I do think this is the biggest need for the Rams this offseason. Even if these guys are going up, they were fine, solid if you will, but they really need some more week in, week out consistency from this group. Kobe Durant, Darion Kendrick, Akella Witherspoon, these guys are fine. But again, I have been mocking the Rams a corner in their first round pick in years. And I think they should definitely go that direction. But with all that said, Kobe Durant, one of my guys in that draft. I like Kobe Durant. I think he can be one of the 3 starters here, but he probably shouldn't be their best corner as he probably is right now. It's either him or Witherspoon. Durant, I would say, is a little bit more consistent. Week in, week out. Again, not the biggest guy, can get out physical down the field at times, but a very smart player. Had a very solid year in terms of weekly coverage consistency here in Raheem Morris's defense. And then Darion Kendrick, it's hard to praise this guy because when he loses, it's freaking brutal, man. He's the slowest starting corner in the league, and it shows at times, but they play him in off zone. He's a heady player. Was starting at Georgia for a reason. They liked his competitiveness, his leadership, and all that. And they like him for the same reason here with the Rams. I still don't think he should be starting, but he did have some highlight pass breakups, continue to get better, a little bit more consistent. We'll give him some love there. And then Quentin Lake, it's hard for me to talk down on these guys because Kobe Durant and Quentin Lake were some of my favorite day 3 players in their respective draft classes. Quentin Lake ended up having a start in the slot in the last couple months of the year for them. They took this safety here and said, how does slot corner sound to you? Dime corner. And he did that. He had to man up, man-to-man a lot of times and defend two-way goes and all that, and he held up. He was a player I really liked in that draft, not for his athleticism or his size or his run defense or anything like that, but because of his football IQ. His dad played in the NFL, and you talk about route squeeze and seeing routes with anticipation and jumping stuff. It was really good coming out of UCLA, and he's done that here for the Rams. I do think he has a role as a starting defensive back for them next year, whether that's at safety or slot corner or even as that dime corner. I think he's shown that he can play. Very curious to see where they think that is moving forward. And then the punter here, Ethan Evans, the rookie, has had a very good season. He's going to wrap up this love fest for the Rams here. What a year. What a fun team they're going to be next year, really. Just so overwhelmingly impressed by the entire operation here for the Rams. And then our last team here for the NFC West, the Seattle Seahawks. For their star of the season, I'm going to go with Boye Mafe. And man, did this team need anybody on this pass rush to really step up, to develop. They've invested in these guys, and between Taylor and honestly Derek Hall this year wasn't great. Among others, they have not had hits. You go all the way back to LJ Collier in the first round. And Boye Mafe really drafted off the traits at the top of round 2, did not look good in his rookie year. At 24 years old, you had to be at least a little bit concerned there, but everything clicked into place here in year 2. 58 pressures, 9 sacks, did cool off a little bit as the year went on, but still very solid, and plenty of reason to believe that he can at least be a number 2 edge rusher for the Seahawks into future seasons. I would say he has the athletic upside to be even more than that, but for even him to hit as a quality number 2 rusher as a second-round pick, that's a big win for the Seahawks and for a defense that honestly didn't have a lot of breakouts, didn't have a lot of guys stepping up this year. Boye Mafe certainly did. So he's going to be their star of the season. Let's talk about this offense a little bit. Jackson Smith-Njigba just kind of steadily climbing up here after, honestly, a very slow start to his career for a guy that was supposed to kind of hit the ground as one of the game's best slot receivers right away. That was his biggest selling point, and even now, I wouldn't say he's there. In fact, he had 8 drops this season, was just 3 for 12 on contested catches. We are still a ways to go with Jackson Smith-Njigba, but he is going up here. Did impress down the stretch, and I really look, honestly, it's not so much, okay, yeah, he finally cemented himself as that dominant slot wide receiver. I think he can still show more there. Honestly, it was some of the big man catches down the field and winning vertically that I didn't necessarily project from him, especially out the gate. Like, you look at that touchdown catch against Philadelphia in Week 15 where he stacks I think it was James Bradbury on the outside. Nice over-the-shoulder touchdown. That Dallas game where he won on that deep corner route. Just making some plays down the stretch that he really wasn't earlier on in the year. So good to see them get him going, and I think they're going to need it because I do think Tyler Lockett has steadily been regressing here. It's nothing rapid, it's nothing to panic about, it's nothing major, but I do think he's less efficient than he's been in the peak of his powers. He is 31 years old. This happens in time, right? He had the lowest yards per route run this season since 2017. This was the first year in 5 seasons that he was under 1,000 yards. For the second year in a row as well, his contested catch percentage has been in the mid-30s, where he's actually been stunningly like a career 45-50% guy, has just had this crazy ability to come down with tough catches despite not being the biggest guy, and he hasn't been doing that as much. So I do think this slight regression is warranted. I still think he's a very good player, but I think lower expectations slightly more heading into another season here for Tyler Lockett. And then on the offensive line, I do have a note on Abraham Lucas. He missed most of the season, and then when he came back from injury, I'm not going to lie, man, he looked horrible. He was a problem for them at right tackle. I don't want to jump to conclusions because he was so good as a rookie and was a good prospect, and maybe he was just injured, but all eyes are going to be on that at right tackle heading into next year. Like, you'd like to think because of what he showed as a rookie, he's going to be their starter, but he cannot look like he did coming back from that injury. I didn't have the balls to lower him, but certainly played bad enough to get lowered. I'm just going to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt coming off that injury that he can get things back next year. But again, he will be on a watch list to go down fairly heavily if he comes out the gate and is struggling again next year, because he won't have really the excuse of that fresh off the injury. And then at right guard next to him, Anthony Bradford was drafted in the 4th round as this kind of mauling, technically like high upside guard for the Seahawks, and I think he was fine as a run blocker, honestly, as a rookie, but that really wasn't the question for him. The question was pass protection, and he was rough, man. He and Phil Haynes both, who we lowered in the last episode of Studs and Duds, I don't know that they can trot Anthony Bradford out there. Now, I would have said that about Ed Ingram coming out of LSU a year ago for the Vikings, who cleaned things up in year 2. Maybe that can happen for Bradford, but I just was not impressed at all by what he was able to do in pass protection, and he had Geno Smith just running for his life, having to get rid of the ball a lot, especially in the second half of the year. So he's got to come down. And then let's flip over and talk more about this defense that definitely had some guys stepping up, but also some guys not so much. Jarran Reed is a guy that did have a really good year for the Seahawks, arguably a career year as a pass rusher here at 31 years old. Just ate up a bazillion pass rush snaps, 483 snaps, 809 total snaps on the season. That is 16th in the NFL in total snaps for interior defensive players, which is pretty surprising considering they also have Leonard Williams and Draymond Jones here. So he was getting out there, ended up with 43 pressures, 7 sacks. Yeah, I mean, that's all I've got to say. I don't think this is some late career superstar breakout or anything, but he had a nice year, deserves to go up. But then into the second level, Jordan Brooks, man, really arguably like the worst year of his career. He's been a guy that's been a pretty consistent tackler, but his 16.5% missed tackles this year was wild, inexcusable, really. He did miss some time. He dealt with some injuries, but he continued to be a guy that just could be attacked in coverage. Really, the best thing he did this year was rush the passer, where he did have 6 sacks, but they declined his 5th-year option, really made him come out and prove what he could do this year, and I think he ran himself out of Seattle. He's going to go down 2 after, I thought, showing some promise last year. I thought he flashed some better plays in coverage and had really established himself as one of the more consistent run-defending linebackers around, at least, let's just say, the NFC, but not so much this year, man. He was falling all over the place, failing to make plays. His defensive stops dropped from 61 last year to 42 this year. And I think they're going to let him go, honestly. I don't know how much he's going to get paid elsewhere, but if you're Seattle, I think Brooks still has a decent case to make some solid money just because he is a former first-round pick and has, 500 tackles in 4 years or something. So his agent will get him paid, but if you're Seattle, I mean, I would rather attract Patrick Queen over following Coach Mack than pay Jordan Brooks. And I'm not even the biggest Patrick Queen guy, but yeah, Brooks coming down here. But as we get to the secondary, we are going to raise Devon Witherspoon yet again. Talked about him when we just talked about the Rams, where Witherspoon would be my second vote for Defensive Rookie of the Year. Honestly, he probably was better relative to his position than what Will Anderson was, which in a way you can make a case that he should have been the vote for Defensive Rookie of the Year. I would have been totally fine with it if he did. I mean, this guy was a top 10 draft pick. He was everything that he was at Illinois, he's a great cover player, extremely sticky. His coverage metrics are very good. You watch his film, he's got that snappy route squeeze, fluid hips. He understands the coverage aspect, but one of the funnest thing about Devon Witherspoon is he's an undersized player. He's like 180 pounds, but he is one of the most tenacious, fearless run defenders, I should say. And it showed up. I mean, he was making defensive stops, blowing up screens, you name it. He's incredible, man. He's really, I would say, living up early in his career to all of those Jair Alexander comps. He looks outstanding. And then we also are going to raise Michael Jackson, the outside corner here. So they liked to play Witherspoon in the slot, and they were really able to do that a lot because, early in the year, Trey Brown played well on the outside, but Mike Jackson came back from injury, and he played well on the outside. He's a big-bodied, kind of classic Seahawks style outside corner. Not the most athletic guy in the world. Can be picked on in certain matchups. I'm not saying he's locked down or anything like that, but he's very solid, very physical, very smart player, and has carved out a nice role as a capable starter here in Seattle. So he's going to go up another one here after a pretty solid year last year on the outside. But then we look to the safety room, and look, Jamal Adams, what a fall off, right? Like, that's really the only thing you can say here. He was rated up in the not high 90s, but mid to low 90s when they traded 2 first-round picks for a safety in Jamal Adams. He was that type of player. Honestly, when they made the trade, I know that people were saying it was a slight overpay, but I don't think people were saying, like, oh my God, wholly egregious, worst trade of the decade type of deal, which this really, in hindsight, has been a disaster. To lose 2 first-round picks for this guy that's, the 4th best safety on this team right now. It's hard to watch, too. He's, like, yelling at fans and missing tackles, can't stay healthy. I feel for him at this point. And that's before even the mention that any time a team isolates him in coverage, he can't flip his hips. He can't anticipate routes. He can't really seemingly run in space anymore. He is a problem. He's coming down into the mid-70s here for my ratings, -8, because heading into the year, I was kind of like, well, let's wait and see what he looks like. Can he get healthy and still be a guy? He's going to have to go out and prove it at this point. That ship seems to have sailed. There is still that one saving grace, though, where you're bringing in Coach Mack, who found a role for Kyle Hamilton. And I don't know that Jamal Adams can be that player anymore, as we just talked about. But if there's a role that probably would be fit for Jamal Adams, it would be exactly what Kyle Hamilton did last year, where he's a quasi linebacker, quasi slot corner, strong safety only type of player. That's your one hope, that maybe Jamal Adams can still work out here. Or they'll just cut him and find someone else to do it. I don't know, but it's been rough. He's coming down big time here. Now, the other safety they signed has been a really nice value signing for them. I think inarguably was their best safety this year. That's Julian Love. It's just a really heady, fluid mover, sticky coverage safety. Someone that played cornerback and has made this transition to safety, so he sees the game from that coverage angle. Not the biggest guy, not the most imposing like run defending safety or anything like that, but he's an incredibly useful player. You can kind of move him up and down, play him everywhere. You can play him free safety, strong safety, too high. You can buzz him down into a hook zone. You can even run him as a slot corner, as he's done plenty throughout his NFL career. So just a very useful defensive back, had a nice year. And then the punter, Michael Dixon, who I think we actually lowered in the very first episode of Studs and Duds, had a down year last year, not the best start, but his grading profile definitely picked up and looks a little bit more like the old Michael Dixon here in Seattle as one of the best punters in the league. Seahawks had a disappointing year, man. There's no way to sugarcoat it. I do like the Coach Mack hire. I think it could do wonders for this defense, as it did with the Ravens group. But this team definitely has a lot of work and self-reflection to think about here heading into the offseason, so that they can maybe be a bit of a post-hype sleeper next year. But I don't know that that's going to come easy for them.
And that is going to do it for today's division. Thank you so much for watching. If you could, please hit that like button on the way out. It does help me out. Let me know in the comments down below where you agree. Which players do you disagree or think I omitted from your favorite teams? Let me know all of it in the comments down below. But until next time, peace out.